Hello everyone, I am Blue.
And I'm Red.
And today we're going to be discussing Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance.
Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance was released for pretty much every console on February of 2013. Raiden, a mercenary who is working for a private military, is sent out on a mission to protect the Prime Minister of Africa, who is then forced to get cybernetic upgrades and decides to go on a personal mission as he confronts his inner demons and the mini-bosses that you will be encountering. So Blue, you're the one that chose this. What made you choose this particular game?
Raiden has always been one of my favorite characters. I never really understood why he got a bad rap, and then when I seen him in Metal Gear Solid 4, it made me like him even more, seeing him be a little more of a badass. And then when Rising Revengeance came out, I just thought it was amazing. I love the combat in it. For that kind of game, as being a cybernetic ninja, like he was in Metal Gear Solid 4, and like we kind of seen what Gray Fox was in Metal Gear Solid 1, I don't think it could have been done any other way, and the combat just feels great.
That's what makes this game stand out from pretty much any Metal Gear Solid or any action game, really. It's that cutting system.
I will say this is definitely the first game where you have a sword and you actually feel like you're cutting your enemies and you're cutting stuff up and not just hitting them with a baseball bat.
Yeah, you get to choose where you're slicing and dicing, and you get to see like all the little bits inside of them and everything. It's pretty cool, pretty intense. Honestly, this might be one of the most violent games I've ever played, which is a good thing.
Timeline wise, this does take place after Metal Gear Solid 4, so the Patriots and the SOP system, if you're familiar with Metal Gear Solid 4, that's done and not there anymore. And it is a spin-off. It is a spin-off done correctly,
as opposed to
Metal Gear Survive. In my opinion, there's so many things wrong with it, and it's so far from the original Metal Gear series to where with Metal Gear Rising, it is still tied back to the original source material. I feel like they picked the perfect time period to play with, one that hasn't been done before, so they had a lot of creative freedom, and just using a cyborg character, they can really do anything with that character, and they did, and I thought they did a phenomenal job with it.
From what I noticed, it's really cool to see what happens after Metal Gear Solid 4 when war is just changing completely, and there's tons of different technology here, cybernetic type things just running around everywhere. Almost everybody is kind of like Raiden.
All of the PMCs, most definitely. In this world that Metal Gear has painted for us, cybernetics is just as freely available, if not more freely available, than an amputee who has a prosthetic. So to us, going through it, this seems like high tech, but to the characters in that Metal Gear world, it's just a regular everyday thing, which I think is really, really cool.
With this game, you're not really going to get that stealth.
It does give you certain spots in the levels where you can stealth if you want to, but it's not necessary. The game really pushes you to run through and just slice up and fight everything, and a lot of the special moves you can do, which are usually a 2-button command, are just so satisfying to watch and completely over the top, which I think is phenomenal. The boss fights are challenging, but still extremely fun at the same time. Even though I've done them hundreds of times, I still like going back just because they're so satisfying to see and so fun to do.
I hadn't played this game until recently with you. I played 5, and this game to me just feels like a breath of fresh air in some ways, because these bosses, like you were saying, are really similar to 3 and maybe even 1, where it's old Kojima type bosses, where all these bosses have like a different kind of backstory, they got a different kind of flavor to them, and they feel very unique and interesting, and I think that's really cool. That's one of my favorite things about the game, actually.
Each individual boss has their own reason for doing it, and in a way you become sympathetic towards those characters. So even though you know what they're doing is bad and wrong on a moral code,
I lost my whole family, everything.
I would say that even though the bosses are sympathetic, you do not mind cutting these people up. It's just a joy every time you have to get into a fight with one of these guys. So what would you say about this story then? Because we've kind of talked about the characters in it. Do you think that it's a good story?
I will say, as it being a Metal Gear game by itself, it's not as convoluted as some of the other titles, but as it being a Metal Gear spin-off, I feel like it's great, especially for someone into the Metal Gear series wanting something different, but also for those maybe newer newer or younger players that don't really know where to start, because I know the Metal Gear series is kind of a big beast to tackle, I would say you don't really need to play any of the Metal Gear games to enjoy Metal Gear Rising. The story is fairly easy to understand, not really a whole lot of backtracking. Everything you need to know, they explain it to you very quickly and conveniently.
One of the things that I actually like about this one is the story is a little bit more simple, and it fits with the action gameplay because you're just going constantly. There's never any downtime, really. There's no like 45-minute cutscene. I'd say the longest is maybe 20 minutes, 15. So we've talked about the story. We've talked about the gameplay. What did you think of the graphics?
For the time, I thought they were very, very good. And a little history on Metal Gear. When I originally played the game, it was on an HD CRT, and it still looked really good on that type of screen. And when I did upgrade like a couple months later to a HD TV, that's one of the first games I popped in, and it looked phenomenal, and I still think it looks just as good today as it did back in 2013.
That's a long time ago. This game still looks awesome, mainly because of the art direction, I think. Like, it's real looking, but it's not ultra realistic, which has made it so that it aged really well.
The game is made by Platinum, so the actual soundtrack is just bitchin', especially the boss tracks. Like, at first, when I heard that the boss tracks was going to have actual voices and lyrics, I was a bit nervous, but when they did kick in the boss stages, it just amped up that challenge and that entertainment and that intensity up to the next level.
Stop that plane!
I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit. I think that the game soundtrack fits the game really well. Personally, it's not my favorite thing, just because I'm not into the genre. I think that because it's in the game, though, it's totally fine with me. It fits, it feels good, it's fluid with the gameplay. I know tons of people that are really into this soundtrack, and I would say that if you're into it, you're probably going to want to put this like on your phone or stream this soundtrack because it's that good within the genre, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Have you listened to this by itself?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, like, I could totally see that. It's this kind of almost early 2000s new metal. I'm sitting here thinking about what it's trying to be. I know what it is. It's new metal. So if you're into new metal, check this out. Even if you don't want to play the fucking game, you probably should check out the soundtrack because you're going to like it. All right, I think I'm ready to talk about spoilers and the plot more in depth. What do you think?
Yeah, let's definitely head towards that territory.
All right, so we're with Raiden in Africa, and something goes wrong, right?
Yeah, he's protecting the prime minister, like his job is to do, and they get ambushed by these cyborgs, and the first one that pops up is a character that's going to be constantly reoccurring in the game is Jetstream Sam, which he's very samurai-esque. His blade he uses as actually a Muramasa style type blade, and then as they're being ambushed, they take the prime minister, and so Raiden's trying to save him.
This is where you fight Metal Gear Ray.
Yes, and it's not any Metal Gear Ray. I mean, we're used to seeing Metal Gear Ray from Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4, which is just his standard output, but you soon find out in this one, in Metal Gear Rising, instead of his little plasma cutter thing like what industrial companies use to cut metal, it's swapped out for a big fucking laser.
Yeah.
And then his arms turn into like a giant sword. It is not your typical Metal Gear you are used to. It's completely all over the place, but in a good way.
Well, this is something that I really like about the game, and just something that's a huge compliment to it is this is the tutorial.
Oh yeah, this is where you're learning to play the game, and they are definitely just fish hooking you all the way, letting you know what kind of ride this is going to be, and
Yeah.
it's great.
They just come all out and they're like, this is not a stealth game. You're going to be killing these guys all the time. And it's pretty awesome. The first time we fought this guy, and just throughout this whole first level, I just remember giggling like a schoolgirl because I was like, holy shit, what kind of adventure am I in for?
After finally taking out this Metal Gear Ray unit, you catch up with Jetstream Sam and Sundowner, who have stolen the Prime Minister, the guy you're supposed to protect. And as you're standing there, Sundowner kills him right in front of you, and he bails out. So now it's just you and Jetstream Sam in a tunnel, one against another, no crowd or anything. And he, for lack of a better word, he fucks you up. He takes off your arm and takes out your eye. And as you're bleeding out from your arm, he's just toying with you, insulting you.
Another thing that I like about this part is you cannot beat him. They don't allow you to. And it's a pretty defeating moment in the game for the player and also for Raiden. This makes makes it so that the player wants to fight Jetstream Sam and kill him.
It definitely gives you motive, incentive, and a reason. I mean, who wouldn't want to get revenge on someone who cut off their arm and took out their eye?
Sometime later, you go to another country after this fight, and this is where Raiden gets his cybernetic upgrades.
Yes, he gets essentially a new body, and this is where you learn to do what's called Zandatsu, where you're able to cut your enemies in half and take out their spines to get more energy, which is brutal but awesome and over the top all at the same time.
This is where you get electrolytes, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
Gatorade, all the way, my brother.
Yep, just killing motherfuckers for Gatorade. That's what we're doing here. War has changed. After this mechanic is introduced, you soon fight a boss called Blade Wolf. I think he's one of my favorite characters in the game. He's just this robot dog thing with like a chainsaw, and he's really cool, and I like his character art.
Somehow, after chopping him up into mincemeat, you're able to put him back together and convince him to join your team. So after that, he's with you on your missions, which is, I think, kind of cool, especially getting his input since he is an AI, but he's a learning AI.
Unlike a lot of games and movies and fiction, there's a lot of robots that don't have feelings and they don't understand feelings. This robot kind of does because he learns. And he actually brings that up at one point where he's like, I don't understand feelings, but I can understand this. And I think that's pretty cool. It makes his character a little bit different than most.
I have come to a conclusion. Your actions are rooted in affinity for those from similar circumstances as yours.
Guess so. Not much of a superhero after all, huh?
However, your emotional status is understandable. Perhaps I share this same affinity.
Well, if that's what you feel, then glad to have you along.
And after finishing off Blade Wolf, you progress through the final section of the level where you find and fight Mistral. And you really get introduced to how intricate these boss fights can really be. And she's just an awesome character. And man, them thighs are something to look at, ain't they?
I like her a lot. I like her design a lot. But anyways, this is a pretty cool fight. There's like 2 or 3 sections within it, right?
Yeah, and the way you kill her, I feel like, is pretty brutal. I mean, you get her to stab some sort of chemical tank that makes her freeze on contact, and then you slice her up as she's frozen. I mean, how you kill a lot of these bosses is pretty brutal.
Yeah, the game is brutal in general, which is something that I completely loved. But I'll be honest, something about chopping up a woman just doesn't feel right. I don't know.
Gonna start calling him Butcher Pete.
Jack the Ripper is here, baby. After this encounter, you go to Mexico, and you go into the sewers, and in the sewers, you meet this kid. And I wish that he would have fucking stayed there, because I don't have very many critiques of this game, but if I had one, I don't even remember his name.
I think his name's George.
George? I think his name is George, too. He brings up Ninja Turtles. I don't know why. He thinks Raiden looks like a goddamn turtle or something, and he speaks with an accent.
You lose the map of Ninja Hideout, Ninja Man?
He sounds really close to Jar Jar Binks. He's the Jar Jar
Of Metal Gear.
Yeah, I really hate this kid. Out of all the kids that could get their brains taken out and put into a fucking robot, they decide not to put it in George's. Obvious reasons.
They're taking these kids off of the streets and ripping their brains out to put in cyborgs.
I would say that this is like one of the more intense things in the game. It's kind of a serious topic, but because of how over the top it is, it's kind of goofy.
I feel like it sits on that fine line of real life situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, like, I would say symbolic of child soldiers, which is why Raiden becomes so obsessed with taking down these people, is because he at one point was a child soldier. So he just feels this anger towards these people that put children in danger. And I mean, that's something that we can all understand.
So after Raiden thwarts their plan of taking the brains out of the children they had there, as you're going into Denver, you get shot in the face by the police.
After you fight the police, you fight this boss that is probably my favorite, Monsoon. He is so cool. I love almost everything about him because he's like a bunch of little pieces that disconnect, and he's perfect to go against Raiden because he can kind of disconnect, and Raiden has his sword, right? And it makes him incredibly hard for Raiden to fight. It's like the perfect matchup. This is one of the few times that I have felt like a kid again, was watching these guys, because I felt like I was watching Dragon Ball Z or something. It was 2 characters that had their powers and they were going at it. And there is a point that I know that you want to talk about, Blue, you in this part, Jack the Ripper. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it was by far one of my favorite parts in the game where Raiden goes batshit insane and essentially goes on full Joker, just cuts loose. You're used to seeing this guy that's kind of been through war-torn battlefield trying to come to terms with himself, trying to make the right choice, and then essentially his inner demon takes over. He goes nuts and is just great.
I will say I have a little bit of a criticism with this, but for the most part, I'm okay with it. I have this meter. It's like the cringe meter. It's inside my head. It goes from 1 to 10. I would say that this gets to an 8. 10 is like cringe overload for me, where 8 is, it's okay. It's like in the yellow. It's not peaking yet. It's fine. I think that it gets really, really close to being bad, but it stays good, and I'm okay with Jack the Ripper.
After defeating Monsoon, you progress up the tower, and you fight Sundowner with his impeccable smile, and his boss fight is not my favorite, but I really did enjoy, as you're still slicing and dicing, and as you fight him, he puts the shield up, and if you don't hit it just right, it blows up in your face.
You know, unfortunately, this is a huge criticism I have of the game, because so far we have been going really good. It's like a non-stop roller coaster, and then you hit Sundowner. He is my least favorite boss by far. I do not like the shield mechanic, and maybe it's just because I suck at the game, but I really don't like this boss. It just felt like it slowed down the action.
After defeating Sundowner, you come in contact with Jetstream Sam, the guy you've essentially been wanting to kill, wanting to run into the entire game, and it sets the mood for essentially a samurai showdown, and the fight is just pure skill, and he is just challenging and taunting you the entire time.
Jetstream is like a really cool character. I actually was kind of disappointed by this fight. I do feel like there is a lot of skill involved. One of my favorite things about Platinum games is just this constant going forward, constant action. I didn't like how he can get your sword out of your hands, and then you're without a sword for a while.
I didn't feel like it was a huge hindrance. The only thing I didn't really like about his boss fight is when he would just sit there and spam his rush attacks, which there's no real way to block or avoid those. You pretty much just have to tank them. But other than that, I thought the boss fight overall was pretty decent.
Yeah, I think that what makes this boss fight so cool is the build up to it, and then also the overall presentation, where you and Sam are just like really fighting. It feels like the matching of rivals, and you have been wanting to fight Sam this whole game, so I can understand if you like it. So after this fight, you go to a military base in Pakistan, and this is where you fight Senator Armstrong, the myth, the legend, the meme, Senator Armstrong. What do you think of this fight?
I feel like it was dragged on a little bit, but overall I felt like the whole boss fight going from Metal Gear Excellus to the final fight with Armstrong was really good. When you fight Metal Gear Excellus, that one is my favorite boss fight out of the entire game.
That fight is pretty heart pumping. You like
the soundtrack to it, like the song they use during that boss fight is my favorite song out of the entire game. Every time I hear it, I get pumped, and I really like that boss fight because he retreats to this giant robot and you still beat his ass with the robot.
Although I disagree with you on the soundtrack, I do have to say I was pumped up because of this song.
So after beating the shit out of Metal Gear Excellus by ripping off its own arm to cut it in half, you fight Senator Armstrong one-on-one, where for whatever reason, they don't tell you, and I think it's better that way, he has all of the wires come out of this giant Metal Gear and go into him. And it's like he flipped the steroid switch, because he went from regular Senator to if 3 Arnold Schwarzeneggers fused together.
Well, I think it's explained with nanobots, isn't it?
Nanomachines.
Nanomachines. This dude is kind of famous online because he reminds us of a certain somebody in real life.
They'll make America great again!
Donald Duck. Don't you think so?
Yeah, he's very reminiscent of that figure in particular.
Just has a lot of anger issues, you know. I wouldn't say his voice is as squeaky, but he's close. He's close to Donald
Real
Duck.
close.
Yeah.
And he gives his speech the classic villain trope. Before he supposedly is going to kill you, he reveals his entire plan down to the T.
He goes on and on about, I don't know, fucking Darwinism, I guess, and how, like,
The weak will die, the strong will survive. It's going to use war as a business to end war as a business, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's not very nuanced with kind of the politics in this game, but I'm fine with that. It doesn't need to be. This is like a shonen cartoon.
Oh,
anime.
yeah. I mean, he drop kicks Raiden and says, "Don't fuck with this, Senator." And you hear applause. Like, it's just one of the hilarious parts of MGR, and it's great.
I wish the debates were like that, where you got to see the candidates just like drop kick each other.
Oh, yeah. It'd be great.
I would love it. I would probably watch them if that was the case.
Screw UFC, man. This is what we need.
Yeah, I would agree that the pacing kind of runs out of steam, but I think that the game is short enough that it still feels like complete and good. It still feels like that roller coaster ride, even though you're going a little slower at the end. And I'm okay with that, personally.
So now we're at the home stretch, the third part of the boss fight with Armstrong. Blade Wolf comes out with Sam's sword in his mouth. He throws it to you, and he runs up to drop kick Blade Wolf, so it pisses you off even more. The dude's beating the shit out of your dog. And as you catch the sword, Raiden just yells, "Armstrong," which at that point in the game, you know, as the player, I felt like it was something that if I was in that situation, I would have been doing the same thing. Like, this is truly the final fight. And I like that out of all weapons you use, it's Sam's sword. The guy you wanted to kill the entire game, you finally killed him, and now you are using his sword to end it all.
That moment is pretty powerful. It's pretty cool when you get the sword and you kill Armstrong.
Yeah, and this is the first time that Armstrong can really express his concern and worry that you get Sam's sword, which up to this point, everything you've thrown at him hasn't even phased him.
And then you're just going at him. That's when you beat the game.
How you kill him, I think, is just over the top and awesome. As you slice this hole in his chest, you're given enough time for Raiden to shove his hand into his chest and rip out his heart.
Yeah, his heart is really big, by the way.
And it's got that futuristic look with nanomachines, as long extension cords for who knows why. And as he essentially snaps his heart, blood everywhere, you realize the good guy isn't always clean-coated.
No, and I think that that's probably the main moral of this story, I suppose. That's kind of the character arc of Raiden, is he realizes that if he wants to do the right thing, he's got to be a bad guy, which is what he was hardwired to do anyways, right?
Exactly. You know, growing up in his situation as a child soldier and then being manipulated in Metal Gear Solid 2, I mean, this is just what he's been trained to do. It's the only thing he knows how to do.
Speaking of which, I would say Raiden, to me, is probably the most interesting character arc in Metal Gear.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. There's just so much to his backstory and to his history that they could explore, and they more or less just kind of dip their toe into it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how he started as this little kind of feminine looking guy that runs around naked in Metal Gear Solid 2 and is now the badass that I think a lot of people like now, especially people that probably didn't play 2. We both really liked 2 here, but at the time people were really upset because Raiden was not a Solid Snake, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I can't stress enough, that yes, he is not a Solid Snake. He's not a carbon copy, and that's what makes him unique, and that's what I really, really like about him. At the end of MGS2, when Raiden gets a sword for the first time, that's when you kind of realize he's not Solid Snake and he's not trying to replace it. He is being his own man.
Yeah. All right. So with all this said, would you recommend this game?
Strongly. If you haven't played it, I would strongly recommend it. If you enjoy any of Platinum's other titles, such as Mad World, Bayonetta, or even Devil May Cry of the like, the game is just great. It's right around the 6-hour range, so it's not terribly long. It's definitely one hell of a ride to enjoy.
I would agree with you, Blue. I'd say go ahead, check it out, especially now because it's not that expensive. It is a little bit short, but I think it's the perfect length for this kind of game. If you're looking for a stealth game, don't come here though. But other than that, check it out. You're gonna like it. You're gonna have fun. This is The Colors of Gaming. You guys have a good day.